In this video, I'm going to compare the Southern Baptist Convention, Calvary Chapel, and Evangelical Free Church of America. As we discuss these three denominations, we must keep in mind that these three are definitely on the loose side when it comes to denominational control over the churches. In all three cases, the churches are independent, and the denomination can't tell them what to do. All it can do is expel them if they stray too far. Because of this, there may be a bit of variety from the general positions presented here. Also, there is a more detailed video on each denomination here on the Ready to Harvest channel. Those videos are longer, so if you think something is missing here, you may want to go watch the full-length video. All three denominations affirm one God in three persons, Christ's humanity and deity, virgin birth, sinless life, crucifixion and resurrection, miracles, a literal heaven, hell, future judgment, and second coming. On ordinances, all three primarily use the term rather than sacraments, and all three practice only two, baptism and the Lord's Supper. For Southern Baptists and Calvary Chapel, baptism is only for believers and not infants, and the mode is by immersion only, not sprinkling or pouring. Churches in the EFCA can choose to allow infant baptism or not, and can choose to baptize by any mode. Most evangelical free churches only baptize believers. As for the view of the presence of Christ in the elements of communion, Calvary Chapel and Southern Baptists both hold a symbolic or memorial view. This is the most common view in the Evangelical Free Church, but there is freedom to hold other viewpoints, and a strong minority hold to spiritual presence. Who may partake in communion in SBC churches can vary. Most churches have open communion. Anyone can participate. Some churches require participants to be baptized by immersion. A very small minority have communion limited to members of the local church only. Calvary chapels practice open communion, and evangelical free churches almost all have completely open communion, with a very small minority requiring baptism for participation. Baptism and communion are not viewed as necessary for salvation in any of the denominations. All three denominations use the Old and New Testaments of the Bible, 66 books, and all three teach that it is inspired and inerrant. On creation and evolution, you can expect all three denominations to teach that Adam and Eve were real people, the first humans. Churches in each denomination aren't required to affirm anything beyond that, but there seems to be a majority of churches in each denomination that take issue with evolution. Calvary chapels are mostly young earth creationist, Southern Baptists are probably majority young earth creationist, and acceptance of differing views on the age of the earth is highest in the EFCA. All three denominations affirm a human sin nature originating in Adam's sin. All three teach a necessary salvation or born-again experience that is by grace alone through faith alone. On Calvinism versus Arminianism, some SBC churches teach 5-point Calvinism. A 2012 poll said 16%. Calvary chapels are not Calvinist, and 33% of EFCA ministers in a 2018 poll said they were Calvinist. In the same poll, 94% of SBC pastors said a saved person cannot reject Christ and lose their salvation, and likewise, 94% of EFCA ministers believe the same way. Though Calvary chapels teach that a person is not at constant risk of losing salvation, they do typically teach that a saved person can apostatize and be lost. Many of the E-Free and SBC churches that believe eternal security but don't necessarily hold to the points of Calvinism would not classify themselves as either Calvinist or Arminian. None of the denominations teach a post-salvation experience of entire sanctification. Let's discuss the view of the charismatic movement and Pentecostalism of these denominations. Calvary Chapel is charismatic. It teaches that all the spiritual gifts are available to the present, and that includes speaking in tongues. Though Calvary chapels are generally more restrictive in the use of gifts than many Pentecostal churches would be, they nonetheless do teach that they should be practiced in the proper context. Many in the SBC are cessationist, believing that the miraculous spiritual gifts have ceased. Some are continuationist, and a very small minority could be considered charismatic. Many churches would preach against the charismatic movement. In the EFCA, most are continuationist and some are cessationist. A minority believe that miraculous spiritual gifts should be practiced in the church today. Southern Baptist and Evangelical Free Churches teach the evangelical position on baptism in the Holy Spirit, that it is simultaneous with salvation. In Calvary chapels, Holy Spirit baptism is distinct from conversion, though it may take place at the same time. None of the three denominations teach that the initial evidence of Holy Spirit baptism is speaking in tongues. On eschatology, most Southern Baptists are premillennial, and of those, most are pre-tribulational, though neither are a requirement. Historic premillennialism and amillennialism are present too. Until 2019, the EFCA held premillennial views exclusively. Now they are open to different eschatologies, but premillennialism is still the vast majority. In 2018, 46% believed in a pre-tribulation rapture. Calvary Chapel's official position is premillennial and pre-tribulation rapture only. Dispensationalism is the accepted viewpoint in Calvary Chapels and common but not required or exclusively practiced in the other two denominations. All three denominations teach that homosexuality is sinful and do not perform same-sex marriage. Churches that accept homosexuality or ordain homosexual ministers risk being expelled. All three denominations teach against divorce for unscriptural reasons, and views on acceptable remarriage can vary. All three denominations are opposed to abortion. On alcohol, many SBC churches teach absolute prohibition of alcohol. The common position in Calvary Chapel and EFCA churches is to strongly encourage abstinence as the best option. On tithing, most Southern Baptist churches teach that an individual should tithe, and churches in the other two denominations often do teach it as well, though there are some churches that do not. All of the churches are voluntary associations where any congregation can withdraw at any time. Every church owns their own property, and the church is governed internally. In Calvary Chapels, the senior pastor has the highest level of authority. Sometimes Calvary Chapel has referred to this as an Episcopal or Moses model, with the senior pastor having a bishop-like role. Evangelical free churches are much more likely to have a plurality of elders model, though there is variety. Southern Baptists have many styles. Some have single pastors, others have significant authority in a church board, and others may be nearly entirely congregationally run. The offices in all three churches are commonly only pastor and deacon. In some EFCA churches, elder is synonymous with pastor. In others, there may be elders who oversee and pastors who teach. All three denominations are opposed to the ordination of women or women having the office of pastor. There have been rare exceptions in some SBC and EFCA churches. Most churches in all three denominations have only men as deacons, but there are churches in all three denominations with women deacons or deaconesses. The EFCA is alone part of the National Association of Evangelicals. There are over 47,500 Southern Baptist congregations, around 1,800 Calvary Chapels, and around 1,500 EFCA churches or church plants. Ready to Harvest is all about Christian denominations. Take a look at our other videos and consider subscribing.